But there is another way, sedatives. Netflix. It works. So Sri Lanka right now, out of control. Their problem is petrol, food. If I give them heaps of petrol, food, Netflix, comfort, they'll all go home. They're only rioting because of the food situation and they can't get any petrol.
We definitely have a lot of sedatives, and that is a large part of the reason for why people are able to survive and maintain a life that isn't serving them and that they're not happy with. Absolutely. We were talking about food before. If people are happy with sedating themselves, once they become aware that that's what they're doing, then, go ahead and do that. But I think most people are developing and have developed an awareness of that sedation. And once that occurs, it's very difficult to continue to do that.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
I was having a discussion with someone the other day talking about, I used to be very obese, and was saying, what would be the thing that you could give to an obese person that would convince them to drop weight? And so I was using myself as an example. What would have, obviously it worked to some extent because I've lost a lot of weight, but what would have been even more powerful to hit me as an obese person? And we came to the conclusion that if you could somehow take the obese person and for a day or a period of time, plant them in a fit, light, healthy body, that would be the most convincing thing you can do. Because when you live a light, even now at my current weight, a lot lighter, things are more pleasurable. Breathing, getting in and out of my car, cycling, working out, whatever it is, picking up, swinging my kids in the air. That's so addictive. And so I'm wondering if there's a way we could somehow, rather than guilt the fat person to become skinny or scare them, heart attacks coming, get skinny, if you could give them a transcendent experience into what it would be like if they were thinner, I think that would drive them in the same way. Can you give humans that kind of an experience into a more enlightened, or whatever the word is, a better existence, to be more human, and then they're captivated by that, and it can bring them to change.
One of the ways that I don't know, this is challenging for some people, but I don't see our society as particularly successful, because I think it depends on how you measure success.
Of course, yes.
One way that you can measure success is by longevity. There are lots of ways to measure success, but let's just
pure age.
Yeah.
So blue zones.
What do you mean by what's blue zones?
Oh, blue zones are some certain areas around the planet. I think there's like 6 or 7, not many of them, where people live above 100.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah, right. Where's one of those?
They're usually in cultures, I haven't looked at them for a while, they probably shift around, but some of the Asian cultures do it.
Yeah.
Where they live very peaceful, restful, unstressful, and often vegetarian lifestyles. But with a high amount of fat. But it's not just about nutrition. They were trying to discover, why are these blue zones existing? But then, of course, there's another measure, not just lifespan, but health span. Because some people have longevity and they live to 110, but they're basically, by 85, they're useless. Everything's in pain.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, there's individual longevity and there's societal longevity. So if we look at a society that we might say was a very successful society, so our society in Australia has only been here for a couple of hundred years. If we look at Western society...
Well, the British would be the number one, wouldn't they?
Well, how long was British society really dominant? It's still a few hundred years, close to maybe 1,000 years. It depends where you cut it off.
Well, fair enough to say a few hundred years, like Enlightenment onwards.
Sure.
But in terms of measuring not just longevity, so not just lifespan, but health span, look at what it's achieved. I know you got the evils that it's had, all right, not disregarding those, but the European experiment on the world has been incredibly prosperous.
Well, it depends how you measure prosperity.
Or things like infant mortality, science, the rise of science. Liberalism in general.
If you go, there have been some societies that have existed for hundreds of thousands of years.
Okay, that's a bit longer.
For example, Indigenous Australians,
right?
Indigenous people here.
They say 40,000 or something like that.
Well, actually, the archaeological record now, it's looking more like at least 150,000, maybe 200,000 years.
Okay.
Now, what was different about that society to this society? They had a very different, the whole thing was different, right? So it depends how you measure success. Some people would say, oh, well, they didn't develop cars and planes and helicopters. But that's a very westernized view of that society, because they didn't want those things. What they had instead was a very different relationship, for example, with the land.
But what about objective things like infant mortality? They had higher mortality rates. Our medicine is better at saving people from...
How do you know they had higher mortality rates?
I'm talking about the basic things like heart attacks. They don't have defibrillators. We do. So if they hadn't...
defibrillators are necessary if people are having heart attacks.
But heart attacks happened before Western society.
One of the primary causes of heart attacks is the diets that we eat today. Processed foods, high sugar content. Our bodies become inflamed and clogged. The diet of Indigenous Australians was much, much healthier. They were eating direct food from the land. There was no processed food. There was no artificial sugar. There was no soft drink. There was no alcohol. There was the health profile was incomparable to today. So let's go back to one measure, which is the longevity of the society itself.
Okay.
We've got a society that existed for hundreds of thousands of years without dying out or becoming embroiled in some kind of conflict which led to their fall. Or
well, hang on, they were a nation of hundreds of societies, occasionally warring, occasionally cooperating, and so it was a competitive organism that amounts to a longevity society.
Yes, there was competition, there was war, there was all kinds of things, but ultimately it's the longest example of a human society that we know of that has existed. Whereas the more recent societies have all fallen for one reason or another within, I think the longest I can think of other than them is maybe the Persian society. But even that's pretty ancient. So if we look to the modern societies, we're looking at a few hundred years, and then there tends to be such disruption and turmoil that they fall and somebody else comes into play.